Thank you everyone for coming. This is the panel on financial security, personal and political. I'm Tobias Reed. I have the honor of serving as state treasurer, and today I have the honor of moderating this panel. Now, I think it's important for you to know what I think my role is here, and that is really to try and facilitate a conversation amongst these three talented and expert people. I'm going to share my opinion occasionally, but mostly I want to just try to keep a conversation going amongst these three. I hope you will agree with me as veteran panel watchers that a panel that is formulaic, where a question is asked and everyone answers the same question, is boring and not that productive. So I don't want to do that. I want to throw out some questions that any or all or just one or maybe none will respond to, that our panelists will feel free to react to each other, and that we can quickly get to your questions and ideas as well. You're all capable of reading, so I don't think there's much value in me introducing these panelists. They can introduce themselves in their question as well. For me, the interest in this topic is really consistent with what I think my mission is in the state treasurer's office, to help improve the financial condition of the state and of individual Oregonians. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation as well. And maybe to start, as a question that you all can react to as you introduce yourself and your work, I'm guessing that we can all agree that a goal for the economy in Oregon is one that allows everyone to feel secure, to get their basic needs met, and to live up to their full potential. I'm guessing we can also agree or stipulate that we're not there yet. So I would like to hear from each of you how you assess the performance of the economy in Oregon right now. It's an intentionally broad question that you can take in any direction you want to bring in your own work, and I think maybe that's the place to start. So I'll turn over to any of the three of you.
You have the mic, so.
I'm just going to defer to you, Rob. Good afternoon, and Tobias, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel. I am Nkenge, Harmon, Johnson, and today I'm representing the Urban League of Portland as its President and Chief Executive Officer. I'm delighted to be here. We're a social justice and civil rights organization. We do a ton of advocacy for all Oregonians, but we focus particularly on African Americans and those things that help African Americans to thrive in the state. But it just so happens what helps Black folks helps everybody. So I'm glad you asked that question first, because I'm sort of a true believer in process, and also that civil rights is economic rights, right? Economic justice is civil rights. You don't have to like me. You don't have to want me to shop in your store, but if I've got my own money, I can make my choices about what I do with my dollars, right? That matters most to me for many, many different reasons. And while Oregon's economy is booming, and that's exciting, the thing about running the Urban League is I know who it's not booming for. I see the folks who are left out, who do not have any opportunity really to seize the gains that we're experiencing in this state. It's awesome to look at our record low unemployment rates, but I will make this brief. But we're looking at numbers, and we like to look at sort of to parse things out. And what's the unemployment rate for African Americans? What's the unemployment rate for African American men? Age 18 to 54. These kinds of things. I reached out to Multnomah County and an economist there, a specialist who cranks these numbers out and does some evaluation thereafter, so I can get this deeper level. And first, they don't report numbers for African Americans in Multnomah County because there are too few of them.
Wow.
So if there are too few in Mulco, right? So they're not reported anywhere unless we go after them, right? Not reported sort of. Okay. And we've got a great economist and really helpful and handy who sent me the numbers, and it's okay, great. The numbers have finally gone down for Black unemployment. Let me be real clear. So unemployment in this state is for African American folks usually twice what it is for everybody else. No matter what the conditions, it's twice. So we saw a drop in unemployment in unemployment rate for Black men in this 18 to 50 age range, and I said, great, we're making a difference and some things are changing in this county. And the economist called me and said, hey, listen, I don't want you to be too excited about those numbers, because it's not that things have gotten better in terms of employment. It means that the people who have been unemployed for so long, they finally had to leave the county, right? So the pool, the folks who make up that number, has decreased. I can't tell you, I can still hear my heart breaking. So it doesn't mean that things were getting better for everybody, it means that things were getting worse for some people, and they've finally gotten to their breaking point. So while on the one hand, I cheer many of the things that are happening in our state, I know that they're not great for everybody, because I can talk about Pendleton, and I live in South Salem, I can talk about what that's like as well. And I think we'll probably get into this more later on, but maybe I will be the gloomy Gus on this point. We ought to be doing a lot better for everybody, considering how bad things were for everybody. Unemployment rate in this state was, one of the worst in the country, and now we've not come so far, but we've left a lot of people behind.
We haven't heard from our other panelists yet, but I'm going to guess you're not the only one to sound some cautionary tales here.
Excuse me, Matt Swanson. I am the political director for the Pacific Northwest Regional Council of Carpenters. Thank you, all of you, for coming to this panel. I think talking about our economy and really how we all build shared prosperity in the state is an important topic. And thank you for all of you who are listening on the live stream. This is my first live stream event. So
We're live streaming?
Apparently we are.
Good to know. Hey, everybody.
So, when it comes to, specifically, I'll talk a little bit about construction, but also more broadly about the union movement. The economy, by all measures, is doing pretty well. Our unemployment rate is lower than it's been in quite some time, and we have seen a lot of growth. There are more cranes over Portland right now, signifying like large construction projects, than there are in many major metropolitan areas across the country. So, by some measures, things are booming. But we also know that that sense of growth, that shared prosperity, is not evenly felt across all communities, right? So in our union, one of the things we're really focusing on is, a good job in a construction trade where you can earn while you learn, where you get benefits and retirement. Some of the things we used to really associate with a good job, a good blue-collar job, we want those to be widely available. So in our apprenticeship, we've really made every effort to focus on recruitment of women and people of color into our trade. And I gotta say that we need more help. We work very closely with Nkenge and the Urban League, community partners. Michael Birch, who's here, does a lot of outreach to get people into a trade and have that opportunity. And I think as public policy in the state, we need to make more requirements of the industry to take seriously the recruitment and retention of people of color and women into our trade. So just as a pathway to a good family wage job, that is an important piece of the economy. And we can have these little nudges that kind of change the industries in ways that are really significant for people. When I think of the economy, I think of a young woman I met who worked on the Hayward Field project in Eugene. She was in kind of a dead-end job, had grown up in foster care, and the economy had really been down in Lane County for quite some time in the last recession. As this project went on board, we got together and worked out an agreement called the Project Labor Agreement, which said we're going to have certain standards on this job for wages and benefits, and we're going to have goals for recruitment of women and people of color. She was able to get into the Carpenters Apprenticeship at a time when she had a job opportunity. Because if you get into construction, there's no guarantee that you have a job. So we want to make sure there's plentiful jobs available. Because there are those requirements in place, she got an opportunity that didn't exist for people maybe a generation ago that were like her. And when she talks about her story, she said, when I graduated from high school, the life skills that people taught me were typically how to apply for food stamps, how to get on the Oregon Health Plan. That was her reality. Finding this opportunity really changed her life. She has 3 kids. She said, look, I was a statistic. I was heading in the wrong direction, but I was fighting for everything I got, and I landed in the Carpenters Apprenticeship, and it has changed my life. I think that we owe it to ourselves to find those pathways for people. For our union, it's really about construction, but I think it's why we need to support unions in their efforts to partner with employers to build good jobs in this state. And we fight. Sometimes you'll see us on picket lines and out there on the street to demand that our standards are upheld. But more importantly, it's the partnerships that we build with our local electeds, with our communities, to make sure that we have good jobs. And that when people are penciling out these projects, they ask, what are our goals for communities of color? What are our goals for women? I think that is how we make sure that our prosperity in the state, so when the economy is booming, everyone's feeling that. Because I know underneath that, we have a lot of stressed out people. They're carrying high debt loads. their rent or mortgage is more than they can afford, they're stressed out. So I think we have this moment, and I think some of the right elected officials to move us forward. So I'm excited to be on this panel. I'm excited to hear some of your questions because we have some of the answers in our organization, but we also want to hear from the communities about how we lift everybody up. So super excited to be here. Happy to join the panel, and I'll hand it off here to Labor Commissioner Hoyle.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I think when you stated the question, it was over like, what's the state of the economy in Oregon, And I think it's different answers for different people. Oregon is a lot like other places in that the people who are doing well are doing really well, and the people that aren't. And there are lots of people working and lots of people working in jobs where they can't afford to live. They can't afford to rent an apartment. They can't afford to, for transportation. They can't afford so many things. And coming from Lane County, we talk a lot as a state about what's happening in the metro area, but there is the rest of the state. And so whatever's happening in the metro area, it becomes a hell of a lot more difficult once we get into our rural communities. I live 3 miles outside of Springfield, and we don't have high-speed internet, right? Like, we don't have bus services, we don't have, many of the things that all of you from the metro area take for granted. So, if your car breaks down, you lose your job, right? Then you lose your home. And so people get into this spiral. It is really expensive to be poor. And fundamentally, we have a system that stigmatizes jobs in the trades or apprenticeships. So we have, whether it's a guidance counselor, career counselors will say, we want you to get a 4-year degree. And if you can't do that, if you're not smart enough, well, maybe there's these other jobs. And the fact is, we're graduating people with $100,000 in debt, fighting for $15 an hour, and that's wrong and it's unsustainable. So we have to look at doing things differently, because one of the things about Oregon is when the recession comes, and there will be one coming, because it does, it always happens. When the recession comes, we get hit first and it lasts longer. Just because of our lack of industry, we're a small state where, there's just a whole host of dependence on natural resources, a whole lot of other things. So what we need to do now, if we're thinking about what should we do to actually invest in workforce, is one, from our office's perspective, is invest in apprenticeships. And an apprenticeship is, it's a certified apprenticeship program is 3 things. One, you have a certified industry standard, whether that's in the construction industry or in IT or in firefighting. Again, we need foster care workers. We're setting up an apprenticeship program for that. You don't necessarily need a college degree to be a foster care worker, but you do need training to a certain set of standards. So that's number 1. Number 2 is classroom instruction, certified classroom instructions that teach you that industry standard. And the third thing is paid, supervised, on-the-job training. So you get paid to learn. And those 3 things, working with our higher education system, instead of just paying to get butts in seats, right, in community college or in our universities, we need to, and literally we are giving them an incentive not to cooperate with this new system. Because if they cooperate with us, they lose money for those butts in seats. We need to start paying, as a state, paying for outcomes to train workforce, and we need to do things differently so that we don't have young people crippled with debt. So I think that we should be investing in infrastructure now for projects that will keep people working throughout the recession. The average age of a construction worker in Oregon is 54 years old, right? 54 years old. And yet kids don't know, and women don't know, and underrepresented minorities don't know that they can have good jobs in the construction industry. And I will say on the other side, when they show up on a construction site, it's not always easy. So once you're bringing in someone who's a veteran, someone who is in foster care, someone coming out of prison, someone who hasn't been in the construction industry before, or someone that looks differently than someone on a job site, we need to offer those supports to make sure that they stay and work to change what the status quo is that has kept people from coming into these really good middle to high wage jobs. That's the other thing about an apprenticeship. We're not doing apprenticeships for $15 an hour jobs. When we have the certification, it is for jobs that are middle to high wage. And when we invest in that and we have workforce, that's how we can attract businesses and that will help our economy.
So I had a question in mind that I was going to ask as a follow-up, and not surprisingly, the Labor Commissioner anticipated that and already gave some of the answer to that. So I think I want to adapt the question slightly and ask Matt and Nkenge maybe to react to that. The question I was going to ask is, so if we all think the economy is not performing as it should, if it's not distributing the benefits as it should, why is that? And Val, you gave some of those answers already, so maybe we'll start with the other two. Maybe you can react to what the Labor Commissioner said, or answer that question in your way, and then I want to hear from some of you. I've got other questions, but I don't want to go long without hearing from you. Please. One or two of you? Or both?
Sure. So the question is why? I mean, I think some of it goes back to decades ago, right? In the late 70s, early 80s, the assault on unions really started to change the deal that employees used to have with their employers, right? It used to be you go to work, you put in your 30 years, you're gonna get out with a pension, you're gonna have family health care, and you're gonna be able to put food on the table and, you know, maybe have some left over for vacation, right? That was the deal. That concept has gone away from many workplaces that I do think strong unions are part of the equation, right? We help make sure that people have money to spend at our local businesses and support vibrant communities. So I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't make sure you all knew that that is just vital, right? I think the other challenge, frankly, is that investment. So in our union, if you're a union carpenter, we're gonna make sure that you have the skills, the training, and the partnership with contractors to go do work. But that work may last a week here, a few months there. Sometimes people luck into many years at a location, but you really have to make sure there's ongoing supply of work. And in our economy these days, I mean, Oregon has changed. We used to be a very timber-based economy, and there was a certain type of workflow that we counted on. Well, the world's changed a lot. How are we anticipating what comes next to make sure that people do have opportunities to share in prosperity? Some of it, what's exciting is I think some of the discussion around renewables and climate change. I mean, look, there are things that we struggle with as a trade because there are good jobs that people have been in for years that we need them on. But there also needs to be new industries, and how are we attracting them to the state? I think putting workforce in that equation is important. And then I think there's also just this very Oregon thing where we don't want to call out some of the problems, right? We dance around it, we want to have work groups and discussions, but sometimes we just have to say, you know what, as government, with some of our spending, we need to set goals. If we want to make changes in communities, we can nudge industries forward by saying we're going to hit 20% people of color apprenticeship and journey level work on this project. That would be a game changer in some communities. We can say this zip code is struggling. We need to pull people and get them into apprenticeships to make sure that they're doing as well on the east side of the river as they're on the west side. Or in rural Oregon where we know people are, especially young people, leaving. And then I think starting those opportunities younger. I mean, the average age of a construction worker is in the 50s. The average age of an incoming apprentice right now is in the late 20s.
27.
So, my God, that we're missing out on some time when I think people could be earning and learning. And when we pick on apprenticeship. It is the best kept secret, I think, in the workforce, right? Because people come out having made over $100,000, no debt, and they have a career in front of them. I wish someone had talked to me about that before I did my political science degree, because my first job was at a coffee shop, and it was kind of hard to find that next thing. I lucked into some great stuff here, and I love my state, but man, I wish someone had talked to me about that opportunity in high school. It makes economic sense. So I think it's just making sure we help get people into the right opportunities and that there's the work available. So I think as we look at new industries, how can Oregon position itself to capitalize on some of this growth is going to be important. I think also, I'll stop there. I think there's other things I could get into.
As we turn to Nkenge, I feel like I've got play the role of Congresswoman Bonamici for a moment and remind everyone of the importance of arts education and liberal arts as well. But it's the full spectrum, right? It's not, there should not be a stigma about any one of those
But
choices.
that's part of classroom instruction,
Yes.
teaching people how to write, and those liberal arts pieces are part of a classroom instruction that can be part of an apprenticeship.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we don't use the microphone, will it mess up our live stream? Like, will people still be able to hear us well?
Yeah.
All right,
So,
because we've got voices up here. I think we're good. Okay. So you started a trend. Thanks. So I think that in large part, the reasons, the things that are holding us back, and why everyone doesn't get to participate in this booming economy that we have, is our failure to deal with structural bias. And we can talk about what that means in terms of gender and in terms of race, in terms of physical ability, but we can also talk about it in terms of rural and urban. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with folks. So the Urban League, every year we participate in the Pendleton Roundup. We love it. It's part of our heritage. Little known fact that the first guy to win the Roundup was black. But back then that wasn't popular, so they removed the victory. But there's now a statue in downtown Pendleton, giving him appropriate props. But we go to take hold of that heritage and to let folks know. But people are like, what's the Urban League doing over in Pendleton? Because there's black folks in Pendleton, and there have been since there was a Pendleton. And who had jobs working, in mills and in timber and all the other industries that are out there. But when I tell folks that, why would anybody want to live over there? When I talk about the inequality that happens there, the lack of opportunity, and now that the mills aren't what they used to be, and timber's not what it used to be, and some of the other, even the railroads, some of the other opportunities aren't what they used to be. It's like, well, they should just move to the city. That's a bad answer, right? And it's bias off the top. But if most of the people are making decisions. Some of the government side, certainly, on the commercial side, but on the government side too, think that you should be living in Northeast or Southeast or, somewhere in the Portland metro area, or somewhere in the, Eugene metro area, if you actually want to have a good career. If you decide you don't want to live in those places, well, then too bad for you. I see a little bit too much of that attitude, a little bit too often. And it freaks me out because we're Oregon. And that's not who we are to me. Beyond that, I will say, so I got another little story to share. A few years ago, and I'm highly interested in higher education. My mother has been a faculty member at Chemeketa Community College nearly since the school was founded. So education interests me, but at that higher ed level most especially. And I was interested in the number of African American and Latino students at our public universities, so U of O and LSU and on and on. I sort of got stopped at U of O when I was looking through stats, and it became clear that there were more black students on campus at U of O from out of state than there were from in-state. Think about that. Who's most likely to stay in-state, right? If you're from here, you stay here. I'm from here, that's why I'm here now. If I was from Colorado, I'd probably be back in Denver. But I'm not, this is my home. So we're bringing in, and by the way, most of the black students on campus were student athletes. What do we know about student athletes, y'all? They don't graduate most times. They use up their eligibility and they wind up washing out. It's a little bit different for women athletes, a little bit different. But not entirely so. So most of these black students on campus are from out of state. Most of those from out of state, most of those students are student athletes. All right, so what you're telling me is we're not producing people at one of our, sort of centerpiece state universities who are going to have college degrees, who are going to be eligible for some of these high-wage jobs that are being created in the current economy. That seems like an emergency to me. It seems like a big old problem to me. It seems like something we gotta do something about. And it's not different at OSU, although a little better. It's a lot better at PSU, but not as good as one might think. It's not different at OHSU, right? So I could go on and on. But when you ask the question about how many folks, students, are from our rural counties at some of our state universities, it's just as lousy. So the people who we ought to be including, the people who, frankly, it's their state, it's their opportunities, their universities, somehow are being ignored, are being forgotten about, and aren't made to feel as if though it's their place too. So then 4 years later, who will be graduating, who's eligible for those jobs? I could, start earlier, of course, in terms of, we know what, K through 12 education is like and what our outcomes are like in the state. That's a serious structural challenge. In Portland Public Schools district right now, most of the kids in the Portland Public Schools, we're 49% are not white. We know Portland Public Schools are struggling to graduate kids. What does that mean 18 years down the line, 12 years down the line? What does that mean? It means we're not gonna have the workforce, the skilled folks we need to do all kinds of jobs. We're just not gonna have them. And worse yet, we've beaten them down, we've damaged them so during that schooling process, because it hasn't been very inspiring. right? It hasn't been very engaging. So we say, hey, let's go get a little more education. Maybe it's not college, maybe it's something else. Like, really? I didn't do so great the first 12 years, and now it sounds kind of cool. But and through our work with the carpenters, frankly, we hear people saying, but I wasn't that great in math. Am I going to be able to be a carpenter? Like, yeah, believe us when we tell you we got some real structure we can put around you, some help, some support. It's people who want you to succeed, and they know what you've been up against. But it's a lot of doing to get to that point. And I think, honestly, that's where our challenges come from. And then, we're stuck between California and Washington State. They're well prepared to eat our lunch every day of the week, right? Kids in California are like, oh, I can apply to go to school in Oregon, that's great. It's real tough down here in Cali. I can go up there and get what I need, not be too far from home. And I can even stay and ride a skateboard, eat donuts, and take their jobs. Woo! It's a win. So I know I'm simplifying that a lot, and some people are going to be upset with me. Hey, everybody. But it's just what's true. And if we're not honest with ourselves, Matt was saying, oh, we love a work group, we love to talk about things, we love to admire a problem. But if we're not honest about what it is, then we're going to be stuck, and it gets worse. When the economy starts to retract, it gets worse for us.
So thank you for being that direct. I'm changing gears a little bit. Before we go to the audience a little bit, I want to hear some other reactions to that. That's one very distinct side of an observation, and I hope maybe to balance it a bit, we can also then ask, including you, Nkenge, for some of the things that excite you too, some of the opportunities that you see to address some of the things that you articulated well. Then let's go to the audience too. You don't have to.
I can say something positive right now. No, I could. I mean, that's why I should, because again, let me guess. Hi. But on the other hand, I mentioned that my mother is a faculty member at Temecula Community College and has been for all of my life. I'm really inspired to see some of the work that's done in our community colleges and has been for a long time. It's amazing to me. No, I'll say it this way. So I live in Salem. It's home. When I go into various businesses, people are like, "Oh, you're Millie Harmon's daughter." It's like, "Yeah, who are you?" "Oh, she helped me in school," and they tell me their story, where they started from and what they were working through, and they were able to get these sets of credentials that now allow them to be helping me out in the bank that we're in. Right, that now allow them to be, running this small business that is, providing services that I just walked in off the street to take advantage of. That's super cool, and it makes me smile, every single time. There's just no denying that. I also love to see that, frankly, we have an economy in which there are some opportunities to do things that I don't know whether it's possible to do in other parts of the country. I was talking to someone last week that said she makes artisan dye for D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. So specialty dice, right, for the games. And I'm like, you pay your rent like that? She's like, I sure do, right? I'm like, okay, I want to learn more about that. So I'm also really proud of the fact that we have an economy that lets folks have a dream, have an idea, and set up shop and actually make a living.
Next summit, you're going to teach us how to play Dungeons and Dragons or something with these specialty dice. Who knows?
I could bring a brother, a cousin who's much better than me. I can fake it pretty well, but
Right.
So I mean that's part of the excitement, part of the things that I think are positive.
Good
Possibilities.
Matt, Commissioner, anything to add? You don't have to at the moment. I just want to get something else on the table, so we're not. These are smart people. We're not going to hear only negative reactions.
I could talk about it with my friends I was at lunch with. Sonia Ramirez and I went to the Tradeswomen Build Nations conference last week, and there were 2,700 women in the building and construction trades that were there. And these were women that got up and talked about how they have good paying jobs, how they can take care of their family, how they can buy a home, how, they changed generations of poverty, right? How they had opportunity. And I just saw on Facebook, this one woman was, told by someone that women in the construction industry they just do sweeping and flagging. So she put something out on Facebook and said, with the hashtag not sweeping, I want you to put a picture of yourself not sweeping. And there's like 100 pictures of these women doing, like, up on buildings, doing all this incredible stuff. I did put my picture, and I'm like, I'm the labor commissioner, I'm not sweeping. But
hashtag not sweeping.
Not sweeping. But so we're going to do a poster, because that's what it's like when you empower people who didn't know that that opportunity was available for them. And so what I find exciting is when I go to communities, whether it's, you know, John Day or, you know, working with Benson High School in Portland, I sit down and I say to businesses, what do you need in a workforce for a middle to high wage job? And let's back that out instead of just having, you know, a lot of times people do economic development and they throw money at the latest shiny thing, but it doesn't actually result in what people need on the ground. So I get to do that every day, is go out and try and problem solve and say, how do we train people to get the jobs that are there, right? Whether it's making dice for Dungeons and Dragons or it's, you know, making sure that we've got high-speed internet in rural areas, right? Like those things really matter and they change lives. The other things that we do, we have an ODOT program where we provide tools and boots and childcare for women that are coming into the building and construction trades. Like and we have to think about this. If you're in construction and you have to get up at 4 a.m, where do you find someone that can watch your kids, right? Like, so there are specific needs, but we're helping provide those things. And when we provide those things and talk to someone who never thought that this would be available for them, and you see that their life will be changed, I get to do that every day, and we get to do that every day. So I think that's pretty exciting.
Those are great. Those are great.
You know, I think I'll just list a couple of things. I do think the investments, and are there any educators in the room? Maybe? They're all watching the duck game. Good for them. So, you know, I think we've made significant steps to invest in career and technical education, and that's going to pay off. We should be proud of that. I think some of the things we've done, like what Commissioner Hoyle was talking about with investments in programs that help support people getting into the workforce, Oregon is light years ahead in some of it. So as much as we critique some of the challenges, I think Oregon has attracted innovative employers that are helping us really build some of our communities. And there's always tensions around, like, you know, Intel has been a huge boom for construction and jobs, and their industry is driven off that, right? So I think there are some things going really well. We have universities and OHSU that are trying to do really cutting edge research in biotech and medical science. I think these things are happening here, and we need to just make sure that, you know, we can't control the world. Oregon is, if there's a, someone was telling me the other day, if there was a tsunami in Japan, that immediately the I think it was hazelnuts, the production that needs to be met to go out and capture whatever is out there in the market as a need, or I may get the product wrong, but like there are things in the world that impact our economy for good and bad, and we can only control so much of that. But I think there are some opportunities here that frankly we have because of our leadership. I mean, I do think Oregon has had people who've taken on tough challenges, and some of the investments that we've seen come recently I think are going to pay off if we can capture it. So it's not all doom and gloom. I actually think there's some credit to the elected leaders here on what they've built, because we have a good foundation to work from.
I want to add 2 things to this list of things to be excited about. This is one of those moments where I'm going to chime in and be a little bit self-serving. Oregon Saves, I talked about briefly this morning, giving people a chance to save for retirement when they don't have that chance to do it at work. We're the first state in the country to do this. About half the people who are working and don't have that access without Oregon Saves. And we're just 2 years in now. We get tens of thousands of people who have their own IRA. They've saved, as of Friday, $33.5 million. And those numbers are huge, but the even more powerful thing is just watching people, how they react to that feeling. The people who have felt disconnected and isolated and like those things are for other people, they have their own account, they feel some empowerment. Same kind of thing on college savings, and I use that word advisedly in this group because it's everything. It's everything after high school, although not yet apprenticeships. We're working on that at the federal level. We've changed the tax incentive that's involved in that. It used to be, or it is still this year, tax deduction, which is fine, but that's not very useful to people who aren't wealthy enough to be itemizing their deductions. So starting next year, it's going to be a refundable tax credit, and therefore useful to everybody at every income level. And getting people started just having that account makes a kid 3 times as likely to go to college, again, broad definition, no matter how much is in the account. So those are things that I'm excited about to add to the things that our panelists have already said. Now, you've heard us for a while. What do you want to talk about? I've got lots of other questions, but please. And would you please introduce yourself as you start too?
Yes, my name is Brooke Goldberg. I work for Jamie for Oregon.
Okay.
But in my former life, I was a military family advocate. And one of the core groups that we were most concerned about when it comes to financial stability and long-term successes are caregivers. And that includes caregivers of children with special needs who can't work full-time. That includes caregivers of veterans. And that also includes caregivers of aging parents. And we have a whole slew of baby boomers who are getting ready to retire, many of whom need health support, and a whole lot of people working, but not nearly as many as are aging. And so I'm very curious with the compiling problems of student loan debt, low paying wages, and the very unique needs of being a caregiver, what kind of things you think Oregonians can do, what we can do as a state to kind of prop up that particular population, because caregivers obviously provide a really vital service to us as a state.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a few things. One is, as we look at the most vulnerable members in our society, whether it's people with disabilities or children or seniors, we do have the boomer generation. I'm like right at the tail end of that, and we're going to get older and we're going to need people to take care of us, and it is not sustainable to have those kind of vulnerable people being cared for by someone making $13 an hour and not able to pay for rent, because then what you have is, you don't have people that stay in that job, right? Like you have people that are on the margins themselves. And so we're working with SEIU, and this has been done in other states, to set up an apprenticeship program, to have a certification, to make sure that we can say people who are giving care for our most vulnerable, populations, should have a certification, and they should be compensated for the worth that they give. And quite frankly, it's more than $13 an hour, it's more than $15 an hour. And if we look at how we're paying for long-term care, if we look at how we're paying for care, there's money that goes into administration, there's money that goes into all these different pockets before it gets to the worker. And so I think we really need to just, in a lot of healthcare, there's a lot of money that's spent on healthcare, and not so much gets down to the worker. So I really think that we need to reassess how we deliver care. And so what we're doing is working on a certification program that will allow those workers and us, working with the state to say, these people with this certification should have this level of compensation, which does cost more, but again, there's money we can take from other places to put it where it belongs, which is to have a highly qualified, stable workforce that can afford rent and food and a decent life.
I don't have a great answer to that question, but it's something that we think about all the time at the Urban League, not just for the people we serve, because we do run a senior services and activity center, right, for our elders. It's our longest continually running program, actually, but for our staff, we've got 50 people who work for us, and it's a small business. These people have families, they got parents, they've got siblings and others, and there's often folks who have significant demands or desires even to care for their loved ones, and it's unpaid labor. They need the job they have, right, in order to afford to do the rest of that unpaid labor, but they also need some flexibility. And for a small business, it can be a challenge because we don't have a whole lot of overlap between different roles, but at the same time, because we're a mission-driven organization, we've made it our business to try to figure out how to make it work for people. And so there are all kinds of things that we do in terms of mobility, flexibility, people who work remotely. I don't necessarily need to see your face every day if you're doing the job that we need done. And if that means that you can take your mom to her doctor's appointments, right? This is an extreme win, and it also helps me with retention. I run a nonprofit, we pay good wages, but there are folks who pay better, but they're not going to give you that time to go take your mom, to the doctor. There are things that we're trying to do to figure out how to be better at this, how to let people do what it is they need to do for themselves and for their families instead. And at the same time run, a high quality business with excellent outcomes. And, I imagine what some of the really big docs could do if they decided to make it a priority for them. I think it makes our business better. I think it makes our employees happier, and then they can serve our clients even better. And there are definitely ways to scale it. It's written about all the time by folks who who do this. But I think we need more of it, especially a state like Oregon. We're a state small in population, but we're aging very quickly.
Yes, please.
I'm going to talk about a
And
situation.
would you introduce
Sorry,
yourself,
Nancy
please, Will?
Morris, I'm from Salem.
Thank you.
I served on the school board for 8 years. We've done a lot of really exciting and innovative stuff with career and technical education in the Salem area. If you haven't heard about the Career Technical Center,
It's great.
go there and visit it. It's really amazing. But anyway, I work in the healthcare field, and I'm going to tell a story about a coworker of mine who just was caught between the cracks. And I just wonder, I don't think she's unique in this. As standards change in every field, the standards change in healthcare. She was a medical assistant. She had 10 years of experience as a medical assistant. She was required to become certified. She could pass the test easily to become certified. She couldn't enroll for the test because at 14 she was a teen mother. She had 4 children. She lost her job because she couldn't become certified. She couldn't qualify for any assistance. Tell me how that's fair. So how can people like this who are caught get the support that they need to do the work that they need to then qualify for that certification? And I just think that we do spend a lot of time on kids coming up and giving them opportunities, so they're not in this situation. But for those adults, 30 to 40, who get caught in these changing requirements for the job that they're already doing, we just need some kind of better support. What's out there?
So, I know I keep talking about apprenticeships, but guess what? We just started an apprenticeship in medical and surgical tech, medical assistants and surgical techs. And we're doing this across the state, working with hospitals and ambulatory surgical centers. So again, they get the training that they need and the in classroom experience to learn what they have to learn. They get taught to the industry standards, so get the certification, and they get paid while they're doing it, so that people who have families and people who have lives and that people, who aren't, living with their parents can actually afford to get the kind of training so that we can have the workforce we need. And the medical assistant and surgical tech is one of the best examples of where we went to an industry. They said, we really need this. We came up with a program. We're going to have to in February change something because in statute there's this long thing about a national certification, but we're going to make that small change so that we can start this throughout the state. And this is exactly the type of thing that I think that we can be doing creatively, and not only that we could be doing, but we should be doing as a state, because it is an unrealistic expectation for, most people I know, and certainly everyone I grew up with, to expect that they can study and learn a job, get a certification, and not also get a paycheck.
And are there opportunities for someone who at age 32 does not have a GED or a high school education?
Usually,
has a high school education, got a certificate, thought it was a GED, and
I can talk to you offline about that. I have worked with people who've done that. My office was in, I used to rent space, for my district office when I was a representative in sponsors, and it's a mentorship program for people coming out of prison. So we had a lot of these situations where people need to get certified. You do have to get a GED, but there are programs. And the other thing that we're working on is not just training people coming out of high school, and we need to do that better. I think Matt said the average age of an apprentice now is 27. It used to be 19 and a half. But also, we have people that used to work in manufacturing or the motor coach industry or the timber industry or natural resources that are in their 30s and 40s or 50s that now need a job and need retraining. So we have to look out at populations that we wouldn't ordinarily look out to, because fundamentally, unless you come from a family that comes from the building trades, you don't think about going into the building trades, right? If you've been working, like again, from Lane County in the motor coach industry, you don't think of yourself as someone that can do computer programming, right? So we really need to do better outreach, but there are programs indeed, and we're setting one up statewide.
There's nothing wrong with you continuing to talk about apprenticeships. Keep
Good,
doing
because
it.
I'm gonna keep
Please,
doing it.
Please. Yes, please.
So I want to bring it back to construction.
Please.
I will say my name,
Great.
Jenna
Awesome.
Giroux, and I've been in construction since 1980, so 39 years. And most of that was in Colorado. I'll just say that. And I want to say some positive and some question. I think the main point of what I'm going to say is that I think if there isn't, and I do see some signs of good networking opportunities for both. You know, you mentioned that high schools are the place. When I was with the Associated Builders of Contractors, which is a nationwide organization and went to Washington and different things, we found that we even had to start in junior high. You know, we have to let people realize that there's some glamour in being in construction management, or if it's healthcare, you know, and whatever it is, that there are some opportunities and what those opportunities are. So that's the end result of how I'm going to throw this back to you. But for instance, when I moved out here, I went to the University of Oregon, worked there for 3 years in construction management. I worked on the Hayward Field project. My first main project was building a cell tower 159 feet tall and taking the 129 foot down. And I tried to get it to go to Springfield because I lived in Springfield. So I'm glad to talk to you about ways you can try to make that happen. But, you know, what I have found is that Oregon is great and they're doing some very positive things. For me, as a woman in construction at the University of Oregon, there were 13 project managers and 7 of them were women of all different ages. There were, in that overall group, not just the project managers, we had a majority of women, and they went into other things. So I don't want to see you looking at your watch and I do, I don't need to go there.
I'm just checking the time so I can keep us on track.
But now I'm at the city of Portland, and the same thing. I see some great women positions in a lot of different things. But I see that where we still need to be a help, those ones that have been in that, is to help network out, to help let them know. And I know you said you went to that conference, trades conference. I started to go to one the other day. You see people get together like that, but how do we get that back into the junior highs, the high schools? You know, I just think there's so much opportunity that the state is really positive of. So how would you see us getting out there and helping people realize all those different opportunities that are out there? I know that I went to a women university, took a bunch of us to a women in construction conference here in Portland, they're in Portland, a year or 2 years ago, I guess 2 years ago. And there were a lot of opportunities there. I tried to stay in touch with some women who are in apprentice programs to encourage them, and their busy lives of raising kids and doing all that, every time I call them and check in, we couldn't make it, but we were pretty far away. So are there ways we can help?
I mean, there are organizations. I mean, I think one of the best examples is Oregon Tradeswomen Inc., and they work with women to help them get into apprenticeship programs, support them in those apprenticeship programs, connect them, you know, with local trades and local unions to make sure that they're supported in that job and while they're doing things. Can we do more in junior high and high school? When Measure 98 passed, it directed that a certain amount of money that our state spends in education needs to go to career technical education, you know, STEAM classes. So we have a directed source of money now throughout the state. It used to be wealthier areas would have some kind of, you know, shop classes. I mean, someone mentioned Salem, Nancy mentioned Salem, they have a phenomenal program there. But really good CTE classes, because when we took shop classes out of the schools, that's when our apprenticeship, average age of an apprentice went from 19 and a half to 27. So I think there's that. I think it's also talking to career counselors and letting them know that we can't have the bias that a 4-year degree is better than a training program that will allow you to make 6 figures. That makes no sense, right? So I think we need to do that. But like I said, I think Oregon tradeswomen, I would like to see them broaden out. They're doing more. I just went to a graduation of 14 women in Redmond. 15 started, 14 graduated. And so those pre-apprenticeship programs are absolutely critical. And I know we work in partnership with a lot of the unions who have stepped up and really, really made an effort to outreach to people who don't traditionally go into the trades. So I think those things are key. And the other thing is, from a contractor perspective, people say there aren't enough construction workers, there's not enough places for apprentices to go. The fact is, only 1/3 of our contractors use apprentices. And the rest of the 2/3 poach from those 1/3 that train everybody, right? And so we need more like 80% of contractors to be utilizing apprentices, because they need to be investing in the workforce of the future. And then what we do from our agency's perspective, Steve Sims, who runs our apprenticeship division, is really clear about enforcing EEOC rules and ensuring that when people bring apprentices in, that they're looking at diversity and how to increase diversity in each of their trades.
So on that very thing, real quick, I sat next to a gentleman that was head of painting trades at the LGBT thing, and he said that Multnomah County and somewhere else buys into the apprenticeship program, but the city of Portland doesn't. I was surprised, but how do we get them on board? I mean, you know, I don't know, they don't.
Somebody
That's
gonna
just-
take that question.
Throw that back to you.
Michael?
Well, and if you don't wanna answer it, I mean,
No,
I'm
I'm from Springfield, I don't know.
I'm glad to say, let's get them on.
Well, I think that, let's leave the specifics of aside, and you two should talk.
Yeah.
I think that, because I do think this is bigger than construction, but let me just say that construction, because we've been talking a lot about it, it's obviously an interest, but a lot of this has to do with, you know, sometimes we have to make some hard choices to move forward with development or economic activity. And we need to get these things off the ground, because there are tools underneath, are like the Hayward Field project or these other projects that are able to not just deal with workforce, but also women and minority-owned businesses. There are things and laws that really the public purchasing and infrastructure allows us to nudge an industry for. The left to its own devices hasn't quite got there. Like, it's comfortable, people are making money, and they've kind of built their business, but we're looking to bring up all Oregonians, so I think we want to try to make sure that, you know, sometimes we have tough choices. If you're going to run a light rail to Southwest Portland, that's going to go through some neighborhoods, and people are going to have tough conversations, and sometimes your neighbors may not be happy, but we're trying to figure out how do we embrace some of this change to make sure our economy continues to grow. I mean, my narrow interest is construction, but that can also be in healthcare. I mean, you brought up is it Mary? Nancy, sorry, Nancy, almost got it. There are lots of industries that are trying to struggle to embrace some changes right now to make sure that they're growing. So as a state, I think just keeping that idea in front and center, that we're trying to grow, we're trying to capture, you know, we're a state that people are moving to, so we want to capture new folks, new industries, and be welcoming. I think that's just the goal there, and our cities and counties, I think, just need to be a good partner in making sure they're using some of the standards, like who are we hiring, what type of workforce are we building, where are we recruiting workers, and kind of holding all of our business partners to the deal that this is how we're going to grow together. I think there's a win-win there, but sometimes we get bogged down in our processes.
You know, Portland Fire has a all-girls camp to get girls interested in being firefighters.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool,
Tualatin Valley too,
right?
yeah.
What are you saying, Michael?
I was saying, so do the Carpenters. They have a Hoyle program for all women.
And I think, we know a few different things, because they come to the Urban League and they say, make sure your kids know about these things. And for that matter, our middle school and high school camps are often based in workforce. So we're taking kids out to have experiences that they might not otherwise have until they were considerably older, to say this is a thing, it exists, to make you aware, and then to get their hands on things, right? Because you can't just talk at kids, that is not interesting at all. I recall very clearly doing a cadaver study at OHSU when I was in middle school. Loved it, but it sparked my interest. But it sparked my interest. But it was science. It was also a little art. What's not to love? I think that for the see, yes, my niece is a nurse, and I know something about what she does now because of just that moment. But it continued my interest in science. Although now I'm a lawyer, I'm a businesswoman. I don't do that. But I, did throughout college and for quite a long time while I figured out what it was that I was going to do professionally because of all the opportunities I had in math and in science. And there was, as the art perspective was, because, you do some drawing and a cadaver study, right? So there were all those different elements. So I think we do need to have more touches for younger kids, especially those who might not otherwise know. If your family's not in the trade, you're not going to be in the trade. That's how it has been for a really long time.
Go ahead.
I'm Jill Convier. I was thinking about what, I think it was you, Nkenge, who were talking about the rural-urban divide. So I grew up in Curry County in Gold Beach.
Gold Beach.
Oh yeah, it's lovely. And it's at the mouth of the Road River. It used to be a mill town. I graduated high school 10 years ago, so it's possible that things have radically turned around, but I kind of doubt it.
Just there a month ago.
Yeah, still the same.
Yeah.
So when I was there, the only recruiter for any industry that came to my high school was the U.S. Marine Corps. And he was there every week. And nobody else came to Gold Beach to talk to people.
No college fair?
No college fair in Gold Beach. There was one, I think, in Portland that people could bus to, but you missed school to do it. And so it was, I had a lot of friends that went into the military. I was at the exact right age that meant that a lot of my friends got shot in Iraq. So that being the kind of sense of opportunity growing up in Gold Beach, there's also, it's a different political landscape than it is. I live in Salem now.
Woo, Salem.
Woo!
1, 2, 3.
But so there's also this kind of rhetorical sense of we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we don't need things and we can do this, but at the same time there's functionally an economic draft where everybody ends up in the Marine Corps. I graduated with 54 people in high school. I think 3 of them are still in my hometown. I returned briefly. I went to 1 year of college and came back for a couple years because I started at 17 and was not ready. So I thought I was a college dropout living in Gold Beach, Oregon. My economic opportunities were working part-time as a hotel desk clerk and part-time as a bank teller, and the bank I worked for doesn't even exist there anymore. So I guess all of that is a very long way to say that, I moved away to find opportunity. I went to Lane Community College. It was great. I ended up at U of O. Now I'm a lawyer. But I'm not going to do that in Gold Beach. And so I guess what does it look like to reach out to the rural places, especially the places that are 6 hours away from Portland, and to bring the people there up with everyone else? What does that look like?
So we just, the legislature allocated us funding for a position. I think I mentioned it this morning. It's the first time in over 2 decades that we've had any staff from the Bureau of Labor and Industries east of the Cascades. And this will be an apprenticeship and technical assistance rep. So basically someone, because when I went out to John Day and when I went out to Burns, there's, Sylvie's Valley, they were building, they're building these beautiful $1 million homes and they couldn't find a framer. So, we called the Carpenters. I was like, will you pay union rate? And they were like, yeah, once they could figure it out. Hopefully they'll move forward with that. But there's not somebody that lives between John Day and Burns, right? That's a carpenter. And so when I asked them what they needed, they said, we need someone that can work with us, whether it's in food processing, meat cutting, building trades, you know, again, high-speed internet, making sure that, you know, we can get cable run. So all of those opportunities are there, but the fact is the east side is very different. The time that you can do construction outside is limited, right? So whether it's getting permits quickly, the types of jobs that are there, the type of people that are there, the fact is you can be 100 miles away from your nearest neighbor, so it's a different reality. So I felt that it wasn't, and technical assistance for business is important as well, but we just kept sending people from Portland over to Eastern Oregon, and that wasn't working because culturally they're fundamentally different. So we'll be doing our first interviews next week. So I think it's important to be in those communities and ask them what they want and bring someone from that community to outreach and listen. I mean, that's the other thing, is actually listen when they bring things back and say, this works for here. It might work on the west side, but it's not gonna work here, and then try and implement that.
And I would agree. My mom grew up in Lakeview, Oregon, which, if you know where that is, it's like the back way to Reno. Is kind of how most people know it. But there's what?
Little nowhere.
Yes.
Little East Clement Falls.
It is a common story in small towns in rural Oregon that they're falling further and further behind. That, I mean, young people have been leaving communities in certain parts of the state. This is not a new phenomenon. They just don't have opportunities. So I think it's where, you know, how do we get creative with laying down the type of infrastructure, investments, or how do we make it more attractive? Because I think the other thing is, you know, capital and private investment isn't going to some of these places either. So I think these are things that, you know, in our trade, we have people that they call those areas home, but they're often on the road. So if there's a water storage facility coming up in a remote part of the state, they're real excited because they might get to work somewhere near home. I mean, but those are the sort of things that I would like us to start to think about, is that, like, those targeted investments, how do we just make, like, not every community is gonna get the same level of investment, but if there's some infrastructure, like communities that may not have broadband access, well, that's a problem. Like, who's gonna cite a Fortune 500 company won't cite there if there's not some of that basic infrastructure. And I think that those are some of the things we have to grapple with, because there's a large part of the state that just feels like nobody cares, no one's investing in them. And I think it's, how do we combine that public and private interest in building up some communities? Because they're, I think people would love to, the South Coast is gorgeous. You should love to live there, but it is a place where people lack opportunity. I think, how are we providing the infrastructure? Is healthcare a place where we need to invest in because the population's aging? And I think, does that create more activity?
Gold Beach did just get a nice new hospital.
There we go. So.
And, can we talk about transportation just for a second?
Yeah.
Because, I think a state of our road transportation, our transportation in the state is holding us back. I think it's a barrier to our success. It's a barrier to bringing in new investment from outside of our state. It's a barrier to retaining investment inside of our state. I don't know about any of you, but this past week I was going up and down I-5 between Salem and Portland, and was there just in time on the way, I guess, headed I-5 south for the truck configuration, right?
Nice.
Right. A car, it took, instead of an hour or an hour and 15 to get from Portland to my destination in Salem, it was 3 1/4. Right, it took a really long time, and there were lots of semis and other folks trying to make their way just like I was. And then the next day, guess what? I-5 North, there was another truck accident that shut down a lane of traffic that made the drive from Salem to Portland a 2-hour and 45-minute drive. And then the next day, and I kid you not, because I caught the train. I caught the bus on the way back. I was like, I can't do I-5 right now. I can't do it. There was another significant accident, and luckily, people were hurt. Luckily, that no one died, but multi-day, sort of hampering of our main transportation network, connecting sort of north and south. And you could see trucks all along the sort of the side of the highway around Wilsonville, because their schedules were all messed up, but they were having to do something different. So think about what that means for people who have an option, right? If you grow something someplace, you grow that thing where you grow it, and you got to move it. But if you've got an option to locate yourself somewhere else where that's not going to be an issue for you, well, you make that choice. And so I think that's a fundamental challenge for us, and it's not just the roads, it's also the rails, and it's also our ports and that kind of thing. And we need to address it far more robustly than we do To me, it's sort of strange because we're a big state in terms of geography with a few people in it. We gotta figure out a way to better connect ourselves, and that does include, via broadband, but certainly fundamental transportation issues.
High-speed rail.
So, I have a confession to make. When I was thinking about moderating this panel, against my better judgment and not judgment, better knowledge of these folks, I wondered whether we were gonna have enough, whether I had enough to cover the time we had allotted. I need not have worried, we're approaching that time. So, I wanna ask one question to kind of wrap us up, and then I'm hoping that folks will stick around, because I know there are more questions out there. I'm hoping that you all stick around, and we can cover some other ones. So here's the question. If we start at the top saying, we're not satisfied with how the Oregon economy is performing and how it's distributing benefits and making sure that everyone has opportunities, take yourself forward some period of time, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, and describe for us in some level of detail what you think the ideal state looks like. And then, what do you want everyone walking out of here with as the one thing that you think we should be doing to get there? And how can they be contributing to it?
I'm not starting first this time.
Fair enough. You did that. I'm Matt.
Building begins with carpenters.
That's fair. So we talked about 5, so that's a great question, Treasurer Reed, I appreciate it. You were asking about 5 years.
You could do 10 if you want.
5 to 10 years.
Some number out there.
I would say that at that point, I think that we've looked at expanding our infrastructure package to include.
Looked at it? I'm going to push on something.
Okay, let's say I would.
Let's go ideal.
Well, I was not as prepared. I think ideally we have, the economy could look a lot different. Hopefully we have elected a Congress and administration that has funded a large federal infrastructure package that we're starting to see some investments in, that both deal with our transportation infrastructure, but also with some of the economic hubs in our area giving, growth a chance in places by kind of branching out from some of our traditional sectors or centers. I think that we'll have a fully funded CTE investments that we're actually starting to put young people into different programs. We'll be graduating, hopefully, some apprentices out of our Carpenters program who got in when they're 17. I am very excited about what's happening in healthcare, and having come from a background of working with caregivers, also the career ladders from home care to CNA to perhaps LPN. I think some of those career ladders are exciting, and it's our chance to move ahead. And then I think I would really like to know what's next with, we talk a lot about green jobs and clean jobs. I want to actually start to see numbers of those rolling out so that our training programs can capture the opportunities. So I'm going to say that's 10 years out because, and hopefully we've gotten I-5 bridge that is under construction that everyone's happy with, and baseball stadium in Portland on the river. And I don't know what else I'm supposed to stump for, but those are my favorites.
Those are good. And what does everybody here need to do to contribute to that, do you think?
Well, I think push candidates on what they're going to do to make sure workforce is a priority. I think in your communities, when there's opportunities that can bring in jobs and development, think hard about how there's going to be some trade-offs in our, things may look different or change, but that's actually okay, and it's good for a state like Oregon because we're going to grow. And I think support candidates who, are going to ask the tough questions and really prioritize pushing through some of the the challenges to get some of these programs off the ground. I think there's things like community benefit agreements that really help broaden out the impact of infrastructure that people like to talk about being hard, but I think are so impactful. So I'm gonna go with that, and then I'm sure Commissioner Hoyle will still be in office in Boley. I think that's not term limited, right?
It is not.
So
I
this is
can
great.
do
We
this
have
the rest of my
lifetime
life.
appointment.
And they will do it.
So we'll have a strong partnership where Boley's really firing on all cylinders on figuring out this connection between our apprenticeship and workforce needs with a bunch of really excited employers who want to work with us.
Very good.
We will have solved immigration, which.
Oh, yes,
had a
I didn't even,
immigration reform bill, which would be essential for you to capture the workforce
There we-
you
yes.
need in
Yes.
order to accomplish all of those goals.
That was on my list.
Yes.
Good.
So I think describing an ideal state, which means like not just thinking about what can we actually do, but like what would it actually look like if we do these things. And I think Sonia is right. Having a new administration, having a different Senate, and having a federal government that's willing to do the things that are important, and comprehensive immigration reform is absolutely critical, because we aren't going to solve our workforce needs, as Sonia said, without immigrants. And also, we have people here that are contributing to our economy, that are working, that are not valued as part of our workforce and are not protected in the way that they should. So if we want to talk about workforce, we need to talk about immigrants, and we need to talk about people feeling safe. So I want an Oregon where all people have opportunity, where we have a highly trained workforce for middle to high wage jobs, which will allow us to, attract businesses. I'd like to invest in high-speed rail throughout this state so that we can get people off of, when we talk about green jobs, it really means getting people out of their cars, getting people off the highway, right? Allowing people to work from home, investing in rural areas so that we have rural broadband, so that people can live in the most beautiful state in the nation, and have access to their work, because it's 2019 and we should be able to do that. I think that we should have testing in our schools to find out not just what kids know, but how they learn and where they should be directing their efforts so that they can be successful and successfully matching up with the type of job that fits their skill set. Because I think we throw out a lot of kids because of the way that we test and the way that we limit kids that don't learn the way their peers do. And
Amen to that.
I guess also, I think we should take our public dollars, and this is for you, Mr. Treasurer, and when you get elected, after you get elected, that we take our pension dollars and we take our dollars that we spend and we invest that money into places that benefit working people. What they found in California is the building trades and SEIU and unions got together $800 billion of pension funds. And they realized that the construction companies that were stealing money from workers were the same companies that were stealing money from janitorial firms. And you know what they did? Stop doing business with them. And that is what we can, I think we need to use our public dollars to invest in things that help working people and companies that support working people. So that's my ideal world.
I have good news for you, but you have one more element to your answer. What does everyone here need to do? And then go
Vote for
back
that
to
guy.
Thank you.
And again, ask your elected officials, what are you gonna do for working people and for workforce? And are they willing to dare to do something different than the status quo?
Good news before we hear from Nkenge, we are close to a responsible contractor policy agreement with the building trades department. Nkenge, you get the final word, please.
All right, I will keep it brief. No stories this time, but I will. So my vision, 5, 10, maybe 20 years from now, that low education outcomes and the high incarceration hamster wheel that we're on will be entirely different. Right, that we will be educating people well and have high education outcomes, and we will become a low incarceration state. We've got a small population. I mentioned that before. We can't afford to be locking up so many of our citizens, and not only in terms of the fact that we need them in the workforce, but also in terms of dollars. It costs more to keep people imprisoned, and then the barriers that are created by folks having been in jail. They can't find housing. They can't get jobs, and then what it does to their families. All of these things. They have worse healthcare outcomes. They're then again more expensive for the state. We got to knock that off if we're going to be able to get anywhere. And I see that that's possible for us. Also, I think that less than 10 years from now, that housing, affordable housing, the availability of housing won't rely upon the return on investment that housing developers can make. I think that communities we'll have found a way, I think with help from the state and maybe from the feds by then, to make public housing a thing again. The way that we've been cranking out, bonds in the Portland metro area and metro and Portland and the county and all that, finding a way to invest in affordable housing for working people and for lower income people, even people who are making, minimum wage and whatnot. I think that we will have found a way to do that, not because some developer says I can invest in this place and this is where I'm going to get the most bang for my buck, but as communities we'll have said, how can we get the most bang for our buck as a community, supporting the folks and the values that are important to us through our housing policy. So those are my top two. And how can folks in this room make that happen? And folks who are watching, because we know there are so very many of you out there. Thanks. So it does have a lot to do, with who you vote for. But frankly, after they're elected, get after them. Get after them.
Yep.
Right. No peace.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone at the Urban League, we do a lot of advocacy, and I can tell you how. And for a long time, I worked in Congress, and I worked for the White House and other places before I came back home. And I was a snob about Oregon. I said, "Oh my goodness, my friends were from Jersey. Ha ha ha! How hard that must be for you." Oh, Louisiana. Whew, you guys can't get any good policy done down there. Ha ha ha! I was a real snob about my progressive sort of pedigree coming from Oregon, and then I got back home and got slammed in the face with reality. And very often when we're sitting in these work groups and having these conversations, what I hear people who are in elected positions and appointed positions say is, well, this is why we can't, or this is why that's too hard, or this is why that's not going to work. Instead of starting from the posture of what is just, what is right, what do we want to see happen, and then working from there to get there. Not because we can get there this session or even next session, but now we know what we want to do, and we're going to start pointing all of our feet in that direction. What you can do is say that to your elected folks, say that to your appointed folks. What you want from them is to start with the position of what is just, what is right, and then work from there, not with the present reality of how sad it is and how incrementalism is the only way to go. It simply isn't. I don't believe in that. Oh, so I will also say, five years from now, hopefully I'll be serving in the state senate, because without my Urban League hat on, in a decidedly very different role, I'm running for Senate District 10 in South Salem and West Salem. So hopefully I'll get to do some of this work that I'm talking about, not just talking about the outside.
You had one thing you forgot?
Oh, I was just going to say, and this is based on no real statistical confidence, I hope that we will see over $200 million saved through Oregon savings. And I also just want to say I hope that program continues to grow and thrive, and you all should be very proud to have a treasurer like Tobias Reed, who really made that happen. I think the unknown story of that is it was not easy. It was not easy to set it up, and it was not easy to pass, and it took some risk and leadership, and we have it here. So I think it's very exciting to know that when people retire, they also won't be such a drain, right? Because they'll have some assets saved, and that can help them in old age.
Nice of you to say. I was proud to be part of that team. Matt played a huge role in that as well. So will you help me thank these panelists?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.